Killing the boss of Legendary DUA with one shot isn't anything new. People have been doing it for a long time. But one place I haven't seen it done is in matchmaking, especially at 4-player scaling. So I challenged myself to do it consistently and without trying to give my teammates any instructions. I think it worked out pretty well, and I'll share what I learned in this video. This is a fun little thing to do in matchmaking or with friends, and sometimes teammates' reactions are pretty great.
What the fuck?
The build I'm going to showcase solves a couple problems specific to matchmaking. The first problem is dealing enough damage without the help of your team. You can't rely on team buffs that'll make the shot easier to do, such as overcharge, and you can't rely on team buffs that'll allow you to deal more damage, such as future initiative or sledgehammer. In fact, your team won't even know that you're going to attempt the shot, so you can only rely on your own build to do it. The second problem is you need to do it quickly enough. The boss cannot be the last one left in the room. At 4-player scaling, these shots rely on Achilles' Pulse to do a massive amplification to your damage. And if the boss is the last one left alive, then your teammates could inadvertently steal your Achilles marks. So we need to do enough damage to one-shot the boss just with our build, and we need to do it quickly enough so that we're the only one dealing damage to the boss at the time of the shot. I'm going to start by doing a deep dive into the build that makes the one-shot possible. I'll describe the build and its mechanics, and then in a spreadsheet, I'll break down each individual component of the build and how it contributes to the shot that can kill the boss. The first thing you'll probably notice about this build is that it's skill tier 6. We get 5 skill tiers from gear, and then 1 skill tier comes from the technician specialization. The reason we want skill tier 6 is Achilles' Pulse. At skill tier 6, Achilles' Pulse marks 3 zones on the target. The DUA boss has 3 zones: chain, backpack, and head. So if our Achilles' Pulse generates 3 zones, we get a guaranteed head zone on the boss that we can shoot. Without that head zone, we cannot execute the one shot. For the gear, we're running 4-piece striker with chest and backpack. That's going to provide us 180% amplified damage at full stacks. For the gloves, we're using Habsburg Guard. That provides us 13% headshot damage as a brand bonus, and then we have 10% headshot damage as an attribute. As an alternative to Habsburg, you can use a Providence piece. The stats for those are going to be identical because the 1-piece brand bonus is the same. As you can see here, I slotted in a Providence mask with 13% headshot damage as the 1-piece brand bonus, and then headshot damage as an attribute. The holster we're using is Dodge City Gunslinger's holster. When this holster is fully charged, our pistol gains 1000% damage. This damage is additive with our weapon damage pool. All of our gear prioritizes headshot damage as an attribute and headshot damage mods. If there's room for a secondary attribute, then we use weapon handling. So our mask has a headshot damage attribute and a headshot damage mod. Our backpack is the same, and so is our chest. The gloves have a headshot damage attribute and weapon handling. The knee pads have a headshot damage attribute, and Dodge City has headshot damage and weapon handling. We're using the capacitor to clear ads while we wait for the boss to show up at the end. Another option for this is the Bighorn. The Bighorn benefits greatly from headshot damage, which is what we've spec'd all of our gear into. The downside of the Bighorn, though, is that it's really difficult to hit those heads when enemies are in cover and running around. So I found that running the capacitor is a more consistent way to do damage to ads while we wait for the boss to show up. The capacitor's weapon damage scales with the number of yellow cores that you have. So once you stack up Striker, it does decent damage, but you do need the help of your teammates to clear out some of the ads before the boss shows up. We're using the Stack Broker to build Striker stacks. This is your number 1 priority before the boss shows up. You need Striker stacks to execute the one-shot, and you also need Striker stacks to deal enough damage to the ads with your capacitor. For the Stack Broker's talent, we're using Fast Hands. Fast Hands reduces the time it takes to reload your weapon for every critical hit you land on an enemy. Now our critical hit chance is pretty low. It's 20%. We get 10% from the watch, and then 10% from the 2 mods here on the weapon. However, Stack Broker fires so many pellets that if you dump a full mag into an enemy at point blank range, you'll generate like 25 to 35 stacks, and that is enough for the reload to be noticeably faster. And then for the pistol that executes the shot, we're using the Harvest for its high base damage. The attribute that we're using on the harvest is damage the target out of cover, also known as detalk. There are no other sources of detalk in this build, so that 10% is treated as an amplifier in the damage calculation. The talent we use on the harvest is Flatline. We're using Flatline because we're marking the target with Achilles Pulse, and Achilles Pulse treats that target as being pulsed. So when we hit the head, that gives us 15% amplified damage to pulsed enemies. For mods, we're using reload speed on the magazine and an optic that gives us an additional 15% headshot damage. The negative 25% optimal range there doesn't really matter because we're going to be shooting at the boss from very close range. For skills, we're using a Crusader Shield. The Crusader Shield is skill tier 6, so it's going to have a lot of HP. It has enough HP to tank a few seconds of damage from the boss if we absolutely need to, but otherwise we're just going to use it when moving around the arena and dealing with ads. And we're going to use Achilles Pulse to mark the target for a headshot. As I explained earlier, tier 6 Achilles Pulse provides 3 zones, and the boss is going to have 3 zones. So we're going to get a guaranteed head zone that we'll use to execute the one shot. When we jump into the spreadsheet, I'll explain exactly how Achilles Pulse contributes to the damage calculation. Okay, now that I've described the build, I'll describe the mechanics of the build, which are actually pretty simple. So Dodge City is going to be charged up because our pistol is going to be holstered. So we don't really need to do anything special for that. And then with Striker, our priority is to get as close to maximum stacks as possible right before the boss comes out. So ideally, when the boss comes out, we're already at max Striker stacks and our Dodge City holster is fully charged up. Then we hit him with Achilles Pulse, pull out our pistol, and shoot him in the head. That's it. Now I'll demonstrate how this works on the range so you could see the damage number. We'll make sure that the damage numbers are turned on, so we'll see how much damage that one shot is going to do. So Dodge City is already charged up. That's that pistol icon on the bottom. All we have to do is stack Striker to max, hit the target with Achilles Pulse, pull out our pistol, and then shoot it in the head. Achilles Pulse, headshot, and it looks like we did 143,587,840 damage. So the DUA boss has around 138 million HP, so that is more than enough to kill him in one shot. One thing to remember is that Striker stacks begin to decay as soon as we stop building stacks. And when we're at 100 to 200 stacks, Striker loses 3 stacks per second. When we reach max stacks and mark the target with Achilles, switch to our pistol, and aim for the head, that could be 2 to 3 seconds, maybe even 4 seconds of stack loss that we have to account for. But we're going to account for that in the damage calculation. Next, we're going to use a DPS calculator to break down every component of the build and see how it contributes to the final shot that kills the boss. This is a multi-calculator designed by iKia, and it's used to compare multiple builds against each other. But it's a versatile tool because we can use it to compare a single build against itself by changing individual values. This particular multi-calculator was designed to compare headhunter builds. That's why it has columns for multiple shots. But we're only going to use the first shot because this is a single shot build. Okay, to get started, we're going to remove some visual noise by clearing out the second, third, and cap shots since we're not going to be using those values. First experiment that we want to do is look at how much damage a headshot will produce with no active buffs. So no Dodge City, no Striker stacks, and no Achilles Pulse. We're going to call that no stacks. To start the damage calculation, we need to figure out the base damage of our Harvest pistol. To find that, we're going to use a quick calculator. The quick calculator, also designed by iKia, contains a bunch of useful tools that we can use for damage calculations. We're going to be using the quick weapon base calculator. This takes the weapon damage, all weapon damage, and specific weapon damage and derives the base damage of our weapon from those 3 values. The values are available in the stat sheet in-game, so let's get those now. We go to our stat sheet. We hold G to make sure that our pistol is selected. We see here that our weapon damage is 449,068. And now we need to find the all weapon damage and specific weapon damage and add those together. Our all weapon damage is 45% and our specific weapon damage is 30 for a total of 75%. And this is our base damage value that we will copy into the calculator. Now we need to input the all weapon damage, specific weapon damage, and grade of our weapon. Well, we know that the all weapon damage is 45 and the specific weapon damage is 30, but what about the grade? My pistol is grade 20, but we can't just input 20 here because the damage output from the calculator will be too high. To understand why, we need to look into where the all weapon damage and specific weapon damage are coming from. Let's start with specific weapon damage. The specific weapon damage is 30. Let's figure out where that number is coming from. On our pistol, we have a core attribute which provides 15% pistol damage, so that accounts for that. The other 15% is coming from the technician specialization tree. That's where we get 30 specific weapon damage. Our all weapon damage is 45. 20 of that comes from the expertise on our pistol. 15 of that comes from the Dodge City holster, equaling 35, and the remaining 10 comes from the watch bonus that we get after we max out our watch. So in order to account for weapon grading, we need to subtract our weapon grade from the all weapon damage and put it into a separate column. Our weapon grade is 20, so we're going to subtract 20 from 45. And we're going to place 20 into the grade column here. Now we need to fill in the remaining values. This build has no total weapon damage, no damage to armor, and no damage to health. We do have a lot of headshot damage, so let's find that number. We go to our stat sheet. We make sure that our pistol is selected. And we see that our headshot damage is 238%. So let's input that. Our damage to target out of cover is 10%. And this comes from an attribute on our pistol. All right, these are the values that we need to take our first shot, so let's do it. Dodge City is charged up, and we need to waste that charge so that we don't get the buff. And then we take our headshot. 1,669,635. Let's go to our spreadsheet. 1,669,635. So that's an exact match. All right, now let's see what would happen if we charge up Dodge City all the way, but we don't use any striker stacks and we don't use Achilles Pulse. We're going to call this DCH only. And to do this calculation, we're going to take our base damage and copy it over. For all weapon damage, we're going to include the Dodge City buff when it's fully charged. When Dodge City is fully charged, we gain 1000% weapon damage. So we're just going to take 1000 and add the existing 25 all weapon damage. Our specific weapon damage stays the same. Our grading stays the same. Total weapon damage, damage to armor, damage to health, all of this stuff doesn't change. Headshot damage, damage to target out of cover is all the same. The only buff that we're getting here is the 1000% weapon damage that we're getting from Dodge City. All right, now that Dodge City is all charged up, we're just going to take the shot. The damage just produced was 11,210,406. Let's look at our spreadsheet. 11,210,405. As the damage multiplies higher and higher, the margin of error is going to slowly increase. If it's off by 1 or 10 or 15, that's fine. Once it starts being off by hundreds, thousands, or millions, that's when something is wrong with the damage calculation. So being off by 1 here is not a big deal. Next, we're going to look at how much damage we would do if we have Dodge City charged all the way up and we were full striker stacks. So we're going to call this DCH and striker only. To do this calculation, we're just going to copy over all of the previous shots calculations. And we're going to add 180% amplified damage. And this is going to come from the striker stacks. We're going to have 200 stacks, and each stack is worth 0.9%. 200 times 0.9 is 180. So we're getting 180% amplified damage from striker. All right, let's test this on the range. Dodge City is all charged up, so we're going to stack striker to max, and then we're going to take the shot. $30,783,772. And if we look at our spreadsheet, 31,389,000. So we are off by about 1 million. That's weird. What's happening here? Well, what's happening is that as soon as we're done stacking striker, those striker stacks start to decay. And they decay at 3 stacks per second. And each stack is worth 0.9% amplified damage. So we need to account for that if we're going to take this into realistic gameplay, because we're not going to take our shot the very second that we reach max stacks. We need time to switch to our pistol, use Achilles Pulse, find the head, and then take the shot. So the way that we're going to account for this is we're going to convert this multiplier to a formula, and we're going to subtract an estimated number of stacks lost for the time it takes to find the head and take the shot. So first, let's start with just a 1 second of stack loss. So every second we're losing 3 stacks, so 1 times 3, and then every stack is worth 0.9% amplified damage. So this number here is the amount of amplified damage we're losing by waiting 1 second after the stacks start to decay. We can change this to 2, 3, or 4. If we just keep it at 1, the damage now is 31,086,454. And if we look at the range, it's 30,783,000. If we go back to the spreadsheet, looks like we waited for more than 1 second, so let's add 2 seconds. 30,783,000. If we go back to the game, 30,783,772. We can account for the stack loss with some simple calculations. So we're going to be pessimistic about this, and we're going to assume that it's going to take 4 seconds from the moment that striker stops stacking to the moment that you land a headshot on the boss. So we're going to change this 2 to a 4. There's going to be a lot of chaos in the boss room, and you only have one opportunity to land the headshot. Otherwise, you're going to waste your Dodge City stacks and have to wait for them to rebuild again. So it's pretty reasonable to expect that you'll take a few extra seconds to line up your shot. All right, now we're going to introduce the final component, which is Achilles Pulse. So we have Dodge City Holster, Striker, and Achilles all together. To do this calculation, we're going to copy over the stats from the previous shot. And now we need to calculate Achilles Pulse. Let's take a look at the Achilles Pulse stat screen in-game. So if we look at the stats, we have number of zones, zone health, zone duration, and cooldown. And if we scroll through the different tiers all the way up to overcharge, there's no mention of Achilles Pulse providing extra damage to the marks on the target. We do have expertise 23, which is going to contribute to the damage calculation, but inherently it doesn't seem like Achilles Pulse is providing additional damage to marks on the target. Well, we know that Achilles Pulse makes it possible to hit really high damage numbers, but unfortunately the text and the stats don't really explain how that's possible. But there is a hint. In the first paragraph of the description at the very end, it says, and causes damage to those areas to take headshot damage. So when the target's head is marked and we shoot the head, we're doing the normal headshot damage that we would do. So we're taking our base damage and multiplying headshot damage. But in addition to that, the headshot damage is multiplied a second time. So the headshot damage is being applied twice. People call that double dipping on headshot damage. Additionally, our expertise is added as a separate multiplier as well. This is all pretty easy to represent in the spreadsheet, so let's go do that. To do the Achilles Pulse calculation, we simply take our headshot damage and add it as a separate multiplier. And then we take our expertise, which is 23, and add that as a separate multiplier. And finally, we can't forget about the flatline talent on our pistol, which provides 15% amplified damage to pulse targets, and the target will be pulsed if we mark them with Achilles. The final damage we expect to hit is 144 million, and since the DOA boss has approximately 138 million HP, that should be enough to one-shot them. Alright, let's take this to the range and see if we can hit this number. Now keep in mind that I am accounting for a 4-second delay from the moment that striker stack stops stacking to the moment that I hit the shot. So I'm going to try to count up from 0 and see if I can land at 144 million exactly. Alright, Dodge City is all charged up, so I'm going to stack Striker all the way to max. As soon as I stop stacking, I'm going to count to 4, hit him with Achilles Pulse, and then take the headshot. One, 2, 3. Alright, so we hit for 145,730,416. If we look at our estimate, it's 144 million. So I rushed the shot a little bit. And if we just remove a second, so instead of 4 seconds, we say 3. 145,730,407. If we go back to the range and just compare real quick, 730,416. So that's very, very close. And we know we can one-shot the boss. So that's a breakdown of every component of the build and how each one contributes to the final shot that can kill the boss. Dodge City adds 1000% weapon damage. If we wait 4 seconds after we reach max striker stacks, then we'll get 169% amplified damage from striker. Achilles Pulse amplifies our shot by 238%, which is our headshot damage. Achilles Pulse is also grade 23, so that amplifies our damage again. And then Flatline on the pistol amplifies our damage by 15%. The nice thing about breaking it down this way is now we can change individual stats to see how it would affect the final shot, and we can trust that the values that the calculator produces are what we would find in-game. One thing we might want to look at is whether or not grading is required to land this shot. So let's test that out. We're going to take the base damage from the previous shot. We're going to take all the stats from the previous shot, but we're going to set the grading of the pistol to 0, and we're going to set the grading of Achilles Pulse to 0. So the resulting damage from that will be about 115 million, which is not enough to one-shot the boss. All right, well, what about pistol grading? What if we graded our pistol all the way to 30? Would that be enough to one-shot the boss if Achilles Pulse is a grade 0? Copy over the stats from the previous shot. And we just set our grading to 30 for the pistol, and we leave the grading at 0 for Achilles Pulse. And as you can see, it's nowhere near enough to one-shot the boss. What if we did the reverse? What if we set our pistol grading to 0 and then the Achilles grading to 30? Copy over the stats. We're going to set the pistol grading to 0 and Achilles to 30. Look at that. That's the highest damage on this sheet because we set the Achilles grading to 30. What this demonstrates is that adding to an existing large pool is not as impactful as adding to a separate multiplier. Dodge City is already providing 1000% weapon damage, so when we add 30 to that by grading our pistol, that isn't really doing much. But the expertise of Achilles Pulse is a separate multiplier, so when we set that to 30, that has a really big impact on the final damage of the shot. The last thing I want to look at is what would be the minimum amount of expertise investment needed in order to land this shot. We know that the pistol expertise isn't really doing much for us, and the Achilles expertise is doing a lot. We're going to call this all stacks minimum grade. We'll copy over the base damage and the stats from the previous shot. We're going to leave the expertise on the pistol at 0. And we know that expertise 30 on Achilles Pulse is more than enough to one-shot the boss, but what's the minimum amount? If we set the expertise to 20, that's just barely enough to one-shot the boss. And since reaching expertise 12 is pretty cheap, we can just do that on the pistol, which gives us a little bit more of a buffer, and there you go. So this would be my minimum recommendation to land this shot. You want the pistol at expertise 12, Achilles Pulse at expertise 20, and then you want to make sure that you take no more than 4 seconds after max striker stacks in order to land the shot. All right, now let's go to some gameplay. Now, this is random matchmaking. I don't know any of these players. They don't know what I'm about to do. And we're at 4-player scaling. So run to the room, and right now we're just focused on ads. There's not much point in over-aggressing here and going for stacks because there are going to be a lot of ads, and I don't really know if my teammates are going to be able to kill them quickly enough yet. The stacking I'm going to start doing when the second wave comes in, or if I just see a really good opportunity to stack. And that's where I see the opportunity. So here's an elite all by himself. I have my shield, right? So I can DPS trade no problem. And I'm already almost to full stacks from that. Now I'm running around the middle of the arena because most of the ads are dead. And I want to get ready for the fast roping ads that are going to come from the top there. And stacking on the drone operators is a good idea because remember, you're not really doing a lot of damage. So if you can focus their backpacks, that's really beneficial. You can see there the shield is just doing work, right? I can just stand in the open, point my shield at stuff, and not really worry about damage. So So this position here, this is where we're going to take the shot from. We want to get here as soon as we can during this wave. And just basically, we're just blind firing and stacking. Most of the time, these enemies will not try to flank you, especially if your teammates are doing enough damage. And there are plenty of elites here that we can stack on. I think we also have a refactor in the group, so he's providing some healing for me. And here we're just stacking and stacking. I'm not really worried about these enemies anymore. I just want their stacks. So we're at full striker stacks now. We're ready to go. Boss jumps down. We take the shot. Boss is dead. We hit a health gate there. That's one of the risks you just have to be careful of. Sometimes it goes smoother than other times. If your teammates do a lot of damage, then you're not going to deal with as much aggro. And other times you're going to deal with a lot of aggro. So that's just something you need to practice and get used to. But that's it. It's very straightforward. So doing this got me thinking, what about solo? What if we were doing solo legendary DUA and we wanted to one-shot the boss? What would I change? Well, the thing is that the build that I was showcasing for group play is not a very good build for just killing ads. It's all headshot focused, so your body shots aren't going to be doing a whole lot of damage. And even if you use something like Bighorn, you have to expose yourself a great deal just to land those headshots. You have to get really close and expose yourself. So I tried taking that build for group play, so the 6 skill tier striker, and clearing the boss room. And it was extremely difficult to do because I just wasn't dishing out enough damage, whether I used Bighorn or Capacitor or whatever. So to an extent, you are relying on your teammates to deal with a lot of the ads so that you can focus on killing the boss at the end. You can still contribute to killing ads, for sure. You have enough damage to do that, but it's really not enough to solo all of them by yourself. So for a solo version of this build, we need something that takes essentially like a standard striker build and replaces as little as possible in order to achieve the one-shot kill. And this is what I came up with, and I'll show some gameplay footage, but it's pretty straightforward. So it is a crit-based striker, and all that we're doing is we're replacing the holster with Dodge City, and we're taking 2 of the striker pieces, and we're replacing the core with skill tier. Nothing here has headshot damage except for Dodge City. Okay? So if we look at our stats, we have 55 crit chance, 108 crit damage, and then we have 85% headshot damage. And we're still using Achilles Pulse. Now, this is in 6 skill tier. And remember what I mentioned about zones. The boss has 3 zones, and this is only producing 2. The way that you can force a headshot or a head zone with Achilles with only 2 zones is by killing the boss's chain. So when you kill the chain, that zone goes away, and the boss now only has 2 zones. So you could mark them, and you will get a guaranteed head zone for your one-shot. And the reason that isn't something that we want to do with the group build is because destroying the chain takes time. And the more time that you spend trying to destroy that chain, the more chances are that your teammates will kill all of the ads and they will start shooting the boss. And if they shoot the boss, then they're going to potentially steal your Achilles mark, which is something you obviously don't want. But when you're playing solo, it doesn't matter. There's no one to steal your mark. So you can take your time, kill the chain, and then one-shot the boss. All right, here's the solo build in action. We're going to take care of all the ads and then kill the boss at the very end with one shot. So I'm super aggressive about this. I just kind of run in and start shooting because I have a pretty strong shield. That's a tier 3 shield. So I can DPS trade with enemies quite a bit. I don't even have to worry about the snipers too much. I only really have to worry about grenadiers. And with grenadiers, it's all about just killing them quickly, getting the elite as quickly as you can, and then the normal enemy is pretty easy to kill. My last sniper. You can see everything's dying pretty quickly. So this is definitely enough damage to deal with the ads. So then it just becomes a question of, you know, is there enough damage to one-shot the boss? So we're just fighting from this position. It's a pretty safe position as long as we don't get grenaded by anything. As long as we kill the drone operators. That rusher always comes from the left when you're in that position. Just got to be ready for it. So here the priority is killing the guys that drop the med stations as quickly as possible, because if they all get their med stations down, it becomes a much more tedious fight. And I've already failed at that because the elite has dropped his med station. But the nice thing about doing a lot of single target damage is you can just shoot enemies through the heals and not worry too much about it. There goes the purple med station guy. Elite 1 is still alive back there somewhere. So I'm killing the chain off the boss here because I'm thinking maybe I'll have enough time to kill the ads and then just quickly one-shot him, but then I realized no, I actually need to focus on these ads first. And ad clear is really important to do fairly quickly because the boss has an AoE attack, and you really don't want him to do that at the wrong time. So here's the AoE attack is going to come. I'm going to kill his chain. So now he only has 2 marks, as you can see there. Line up our shot, and boom, it's done. And that was for like 64 million damage, 63, 64 million damage, and that's it. There you go, that's the solo version.